When it was time, when I knew I was, my tour was going to be up in Vietnam, I did want to influence where I was going next. I had always, for my entire life, I'd always been in school the kid that knew every capital in the world and was very interested in geography and history. So I wanted to stay overseas, and I requested to go to Germany after my tour was up in Vietnam, and they sent me to Germany, which was very nice. And I went straight to Germany from Vietnam and was the commanding officer of the airfield. I was the operations manager for an army airfield close to the East German border in Germany. So I had a very good time there, but fortunately after a year there, I was able to meet the requirements for an early exit from the army because they were aggressively downsizing in the post-Vietnam years. So I was able to get out a couple of years early, and knowing that I wanted to re-engage with my academic life as quickly as possible, I had gone through the application process and had already been accepted at Syracuse University Graduate School with the MBA program by that time. By then I qualified for the GEI Bill of Rights, which was a significant amount of money in those days. It was like $350 a month, but that was 55 years ago. So that was very, very helpful. And I was also able to get awarded a resident advisor, the RA position in a dorm, which was full room board tuition and a stipend. So I was essentially going to graduate school on a salary, if you will, almost literally. So the first morning I'm in my room, literally the first morning I'm in my room, it was a single room in a dorm. Around 6:30 in the morning I hear this knock on the door. And I open the door, and it's Connie, my wife, Connie. And so this is September of '72. And she had just come back from a summer in Japan. That was the days before iPhones and email. She had no communications. She had been a resident advisor the year before. So this was her second year of graduate school. But she didn't know where she was going to be this coming semester. She knew the guy that had lived in the room the year before me. So she thought, well, let's see who's in that room. And she knocked on the door, and it was me. So we started talking, and I had a car. She didn't have a car, and she had all the bags. So we ended up finding out what dorm she was in. It was the other side of the campus. So we piled up her stuff in my car, and I took her over. And we went out that night and had beer and popcorn. And that was the start of the rest of our lives, essentially. We dated on and off at Syracuse. And then the next summer, she had another one of these. Connie's, as you'll find out, has an insatiable wanderlust, which the whole family now has, essentially because of that. But the following summer, she took a 2.5-month trip to West Africa to do a thesis or a paper or something on West African museums, museology of Nigeria, Ghana, Togo, all these things. She went alone. She went alone with a mini skirt that barely covered anything, and she was in West Africa for like 2.5 months on her own. And I think that was probably a good thing for me because I met her by then. By the time she came back, I had graduated and had accepted a job with DuPont Company in Wilmington, Delaware. So I was in my apartment by the time she got back from Africa. And I went and picked her up at the airport. And she went back to our place in Wilmington, and I proposed then, somewhat out of the blue. It wasn't a long-planned thing. It was kind of impulsive, about as impulsive as I get. And she said yes, obviously. But I think she was probably swayed a little bit by being on her own for almost 3 months in West Africa, and she'd finally found a safe haven. So I think it was probably a good time to propose. So for that fall, she finished her graduate program at Syracuse. She accelerated it and finished it by Christmas, by December, when we got married. We saw each other through the fall when we were engaged. But it's interesting. I I hadn't talked about getting engaged with any of my family, and Connie hadn't talked about it with any of her family. And her father's sort of a real gruff old, straight shooter, And I always remember getting the first call from him, and he says, "So, I hear you're marrying my daughter." And the young part of it is, who the hell are you? Where are you from? What are you doing? And it was ironical because when we neither one of us had any money coming out of graduate school, and I had bought Connie's engagement ring on a credit card that didn't have a whole lot of credit on it, coming out of school. And by the time we went to, she's from Hamilton, Ohio, just outside Cincinnati. When I went for the wedding at Christmas time, the tuxedo was ready, and her dad took me to the tuxedo place, and of course my credit card bounced. So that was his introduction to his new son-in-law. But anyway, after we moved then back to Wilmington, where I had accepted a job with the DuPont company's Treasury Department. The initial assignment was in the international treasury, which was what I was interested in. I loved the international work, and the job was interesting. But as part of a training program for MBAs, their Treasury Department, which was huge, it had like about 1,200 professionals in it, you had to sort of go around and get your ticket punched in all the various areas of Treasury, some of which were interesting, some of which were not. So I was working at DuPont for the first few years. We bought a nice 4-bedroom house in the burbs, got very financially settled very quickly. Connie was teaching art at a private school and making about a third of what I was making. And she wasn't comfortable with that. And so we had this discussion about money. And I said, well, if money is important to you, perhaps you shouldn't have majored in art history and museology. Go back to school and get an MBA. And she says, don't like that stuff. Don't like math. Don't like profit. It's just not my gig. And I says, well, if money's important to you, perhaps you should think about that. So she actually did apply to several MBA programs. And I always remember this night. I came back from work. This was while we were living in Wilmington, 3 years after we got married. And we had dinner, went up, watched TV, went up, and we're getting ready to go to bed. And Connie says, come out of the bathroom. She says, oh, I got accepted at Wharton today. And, for anybody in the business world, Wharton's about as good as it gets. Extremely competitive. And I know I couldn't get in there. I said, wow, you're kidding me. She says, no, she says, I got accepted, but I'm not going to go. And I said, and she had I don't think she had any idea how great an opportunity that was. So I says, you got to go, that's such a competitive place. Just getting accepted in it is something. So I sort of prevailed, and she took some classes. And when we were thinking about her going to Wharton from Wilmington, and we were living in the burbs, in this 4-bedroom, 2-car garage place, we sort of have been city slickers at heart since the beginning. So we said, well, let's have a trial run in Philadelphia, and you can have an easier commute, and I'll drive down to Wilmington. So that's what brought us to Philadelphia in 1977. And we've been in Philadelphia or at the burbs ever since. But so Connie went to Wharton that fall and hated every minute of it. And after one semester, took a leave of absence. So she still has an open-ended admission to Wharton from 40 years ago. But one thing it did do is it got the money devil off her shoulders. She never again complained about money in academia. And of course she went into a very successful career as a professor at Penn State and teaching art history. So it all worked out very well. But these were the things that brought us to Philadelphia, if you will. And while I was working at DuPont, I had been moved on to other areas out of the international financial area. And I thought, I want to go somewhere where they can't move you around. I want to get a job, and that's all there is. So I joined a bank in Philadelphia after 4 years at DuPont. And it was a nice walk rather than commuting to Wilmington. And that was 1977. And I stayed in international finance, international banking for the rest of my career thereafter. a very fulfilling, very interesting line of business. I had stayed with the same bank. I had never changed employers, but the name on my card changed 6 times. I was hired by First Pennsylvania Bank, which was acquired by Philadelphia National Bank, which changed its name to Core States, which was acquired by First Union Bank, which changed its name to Wachovia, which was acquired by Wells Fargo. So I had a card that read all 6 of these banks, and I stayed in the same line of business. It was just sheer luck that the line of business that I was in was strategically important and very successful, had deep roots and a wide business base throughout the world. So every success of restructuring, reorganization, acquisition, my line of business was seen as one of the prizes. So we actually, well, most of my colleagues from the beginning were didn't survive all these restructurings and acquisitions. Our line of business thrived, as did my career. It was a very interesting career. After 3 years at the bank, I had the opportunity to move to Asia. And we moved to Singapore in 1980. Very interesting place, fascinating place. I was managing our portfolio in Southeast Asia. It was a relatively small one because the first bank I was with was relatively small. But we settled in very nicely and enjoyed it. But after 1 year, the bank got a call one night and said, we'd like you to move to London, like next week. Can you do it? So we went to London and we spent 4 wonderful years in London. It was 81 through 85, which remarkably, the dollar got stronger every month we were there, and we were paid in dollars. So there was a cost of living allowance, but my salary like doubled because of the exchange rate. So it was a great buying opportunity by the end. But while we were in London, we were married in 73. So we're now up to 82, 83. So we're 11 years into the marriage. And we still didn't have any kids. We didn't plan it that way. It's just, we just said next year. And all of a sudden, Connie was 34. So that we should be doing something here. So Connie got pregnant, and after a little bit of trouble, we was diagnosed with a low thyroid. But then we had Scott. Our son was born in London in 1984. And a year later, Lindsay was born, also in London. And Lindsay was born a month before we came back to the U.S. So they were both born in the U.K. They have dual citizen status, but that's not so much from being born there. It was because I was born there, and through me, they automatically had access to citizenships in the U.K. So now there's 4 of us. And we came back to Philadelphia, and we had bought a townhouse at 19th and Spring Garden, Hamilton townhouses that were called. And we had to move in there when we came back for tax reasons, because we had rented it while we were gone to a Belgian couple who were working for SmithKline. So we stayed there for a year when we returned, quite small for having 2 little ones. But as soon as we could, we then bought a brand new house up in Upper Dublin in Fort Washington, where we stayed for the next 10 years. We moved into the Toll Brother house in 1986, and although I was based in Philadelphia, I was managing areas in various parts of the world. Initially, it was Europe, Southern Europe, Mediterranean, then the Middle East and Africa, then the Middle East and South Asia, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, then the Pacific Rim. So I was traveling to Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand. Constantly over the rest of my career, if we were not living overseas, I was traveling overseas on a fairly regular basis. Connie started her career at Penn State after we returned fairly seriously and became a full-time instructor at Penn State for the next 25, 30 years. But when we had moved to Upper Dublin, it was a brand new community, large houses. Connie never really I liked new because I'm the Mr. Fix-It that doesn't fix it. But Connie liked older towns with character, with personality, with trees that are bigger than the sticks that are holding them up, and sidewalks to a main street that you could go to. So after 10 years, and I think it was after, yeah, it was after one of the semester at seas where it kind of just felt like a change. So we moved to an old Victoria house in Wayne. And we moved there when Scott and Lindsay were in middle school, starting middle school. So they went to middle school and high school in Radnor. And we lived in Wayne until they graduated from high school, actually. So when Lindsay, the youngest, graduated from Radnor High School, Connie and I had always been city slickers at heart. We had always really, all other things being equal, would rather live in a city. So as soon as Lindsay graduated, we sold the house in Wayne and bought a old colonial townhouse in Society Hill in downtown Philadelphia that had been built in 1760. It was 4 floors, a lot of charm. It was very nice. We enjoyed it there a lot. But then, let's see here, 7 years later, 7 years into our stay, where I was traveling a lot, Connie was traveling a lot, we received another overseas assignment, going back to Singapore, but in charge of a much bigger base of business with a much bigger bank and much more responsibility. So off we went to Singapore in 2009, a little after all the bad things happened in the financial markets. By then, Scott was out of school and he was working in investment banking in Charlotte. And Lindsay was out of school and she was working as neonatal ICU nurse in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania Hospital. And so we lived in Singapore for 3 years. Kids came out and visited us. We went on trips to Bali, to Thailand, to Australia with them in that corner of the world. And by the time 2012 came around, it was the end of my first assignment block. And we're trying to think, you know, where can I go now? What can I do now? And I'm thinking, I'm 67, you know? Sort of come up. I hadn't planned on retirement. I hadn't anticipated it. I hadn't counted the days. I thought, you know, this might be a good time just to say thank you, goodbye. Which we did. Which we said, okay, when we return to Philadelphia, we'll just retire simultaneously. So we came back to Philadelphia, but our townhouse was four floors, 4 really vertical floors. And we spent a lot of time in our study on the 4th floor, so we thought, I don't think we want to retire in a 4-floor building. So if we're going to retire in Philly, let's find something flat. So when we came back, we put the house up for sale, and we looked around, and we found we've now been retired 5 years. We've been in this apartment 4 years, and just love. And it's nice being on the other side of town, too, from Society Hill to Rittenhouse Square. It's, you know, both are very nice, but have different personalities. So we've been here now 4 years and like it a lot. We've spent our retirement essentially traveling nonstop, pretty much. I mean, we both believe, Connie especially, that, you know, while of sound body and sound mind, do it, you know, because you never know what tomorrow will bring. So our foot's been pretty heavy on the gas pedal, and we've been taking a lot of 1-month, 2-month trips to all parts of the world. And Connie has started a second career writing books, cultural foodie books. She's on her second one with Mary, and also lecturing on cruise ships, cultural enrichment lectures on cruise ships, talking about the culture, the architecture, the art of places where the cruise ship is stopping. So getting a free ride on cruise ships has turned out to be a nice ancillary benefit, which we do several times. People ask us a lot if we have a favorite place, and we've traveled, we did count them, we've traveled to 105 or 106 countries, and we've lived in quite a few. I have to say our favorite place was London. And we thought about retiring in London, but then we thought, oh, it's really expensive there, and you're so vulnerable to the exchange rate. But London was a wonderful city. It was so rich in culture, and it has the benefit of being a foreign country without having the language issue. So, yeah, London was a favorite place. But we have so many favorite places. We really enjoyed Singapore too. Really enjoyed that. And when you look back all the way to the beginning, boy, being very lucky. Had a very fortunate life. Going back to being born in a poor coal mining community and immigrating to a wonderful new place and having an education and graduate study, having experiences in war and experiences traveling the world. A very good job for both of us. Very fulfilling, interesting careers, being financially very secure. Our kids both going through graduate school and embarking on new careers. Gosh, it's been good. It's been very good.